but they do that because they want to serve their community. I think it takes a lot of courage to be a public servant these days. And I hope that in the coming years, when we line up our candidates, some of these striking, brilliant women are on that side of the table. And I hope many of you will think about that. With that, let's give our candidates our thanks for going and taking this difficult path to do what you believe is the right thing for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lucas, and thank you again to USN for hosting us this evening. Now on to introductions. As I'm sure you've noticed, there are 4 gentlemen on the stage beside me. Each of these gentlemen is seeking the opportunity to serve our community in Washington, D.C. to become Mississippi's 4th Congressional District Representative in the U.S. House of Representatives. With us this evening, we have Tom Carter from Career, Tavish Kelly from Picayune, Jean Taylor from Bay St. Louis, and Ron Vincent from Hattiesburg. Due to a work conflict, Congressman Stephen Palazzo is unable to join us this evening. As with any event involving political candidates, CYP has worked diligently to ensure fairness to all candidates, including during the scheduling process. Representatives of CYP will moderate this evening's forum. They include Brad Patano, Chair of CYP's Policy and Government Collaboration, Holly Gibbs, Co-Chair of CYP's Policy and Government Collaboration, Keith Williams, Jr., CYP Executive Committee member, and Kelsey Bloom, who you met, our CYP Director, will serve as our timekeeper this evening. I know y'all are eager to hear from our candidates, so please let's go ahead and get a little bit of formatting and ground rules and housekeeping out of the way for this evening's discussion. Each candidate received and agreed to the formatting information prior to tonight's event. Earlier this evening, names were drawn from a hat to determine the order in which candidates will speak and respond to questions. That order will rotate during each round, and they're seated in that order. Our forum will begin with opening statements from each candidate. Each candidate will have 2.5 minutes for his opening statement. Following the opening statements, a round of questions will begin. All candidates will be asked the same questions and will each have 2 minutes to respond to each question. Each candidate will have an opportunity to answer at least 1 question first and 1 question last. 6 questions have been prepared and will be included as time permits this evening. Questions were submitted by the general public and selected by forum organizers. No questions will be taken from the audience this evening, so we ask that you hold your questions for after the forum to discuss with our candidates. The forum will conclude with closing statements from each candidate. Again, each candidate will have 2.5 minutes for his closing statement, and the order in which he speaks will again rotate. Our timekeeper will use the stoplight to keep all candidates apprised of remaining time. You see the lights there. The green light will be illuminated as a candidate's time begins. When 30 seconds remain, the yellow light will be illuminated. The red light will be illuminated as time expires. In the interest of time and in order to ensure fairness, we thank each candidate for finishing his sentence when notified that time has expired. Any additional comments will be interrupted by our lovely timekeeper. We ask that audience members participate by listening attentively and refraining from applauding or responding to candidates' comments. I know y'all are going to have some thoughts out there, but in the interest of fairness, we ask that you let the candidates do the speaking this evening. Out of respect for candidates and fellow attendees, please silence all of your cell phones and other electronic devices this evening. No campaigning will be allowed in the auditorium during or after the forum, so if you have signs, if you could please keep them below eye level. Although no questions will be taken from y'all this evening, our candidates were available outside the auditorium prior to tonight's event and will also, I'm assuming, be available when the forum concludes. Thank you again for respecting these guidelines and for joining us this evening. Without further ado, we will begin with opening statements. Mr. Kelly, I believe you drew the first position, so we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tavish Kelly. I was born and raised right here on the Gulf Coast. I earned my Eagle Scout when I was 13, and at 16 I graduated from Pass Christian High School, not too far away from here, as the valedictorian of the class of 2006. I studied math, physics, and political science at Mississippi State University, and I'm currently studying constitutional law at Ole Miss. My brother and I own a gun store, Kelly Firearms, in Picayune, and we're proud to be the first production AR-15 manufacturer in the state. The reason I'm here tonight, though, the reason I'm in this race is because I care deeply about the people of South Mississippi, and I'm disturbed by the increasing size of the federal government and the growing intrusion into every aspect of our lives. We need strong conservatives who are willing to stand up to the establishments of both parties and defend the freedoms guaranteed by our Constitution. I'm confident that I can fill the role better than any other man here tonight and in the race, with all due respect, and I'm here tonight to prove it to you. Thank you.
Mr. Benson.
Okay. I want to thank you guys for hosting this event, the Coast Young Republicans, USM, Coast Chamber, and thank you so much for allowing me to be here. I'm something different. I'm a Christian conservative, pro-life, Tea Party candidate, and I'm running on the Republican ticket. I was born in Hattiesburg, and I've got a birth certificate to prove it. But I've lived and worked all over. I'm an electrical engineer by education, but I've been self-employed most of my working life. I'm one of the very few people that you're going to talk to tonight that actually live behind the Iron Curtain. I lived and worked in what was then communist Czechoslovakia. I've seen with my own eyes the tragedy that socialism and communism brings to the people living under it. And I have seen the heartbreak of socialized medicine. I'm very concerned when I see that stuff coming here, and I'm very concerned about the country that we're going to be turning over to our children and our grandchildren. I was living in Prague when Václav Havel became the first prime minister of a free Czechoslovakia. Havel had to get out of prison before he could take office. Now, there are very few in Congress that had to get out of jail before assuming office, although I do note there seems to be some flow in the other direction. In my opinion, we have to do whatever we have to do to get rid of Obamacare. We don't need to fix it. We don't need to replace it. We just need to get rid of it. Healthcare needs to be between a doctor and the patient, and everybody else just plain needs to butt out. Obamacare is the perfect example of what happens when the government tries to fix something that's not broken. Do you remember when Nancy Pelosi was trying to force Obamacare down our collective throats? Do you remember what she said? We've got to pass it to find out what's in it. Well, a doctor friend of mine pointed out that's a perfect description of a stool sample. And I think with Obamacare, that's what we got. So, thank you very much for letting me be here, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the program.
Mr. Card.
I don't think I've ever heard that analogy on a speaker.
Enjoyed that.
Folks, I'm a businessman. I started my own business when I was a young man, 23 years old. Made a lot of mistakes when I did that, and you can probably imagine why. But I was raised in a strong conservative values, Christian family, and I was raised that whatever you do, I can do better. And that means you got to go to school. It means you have to work hard. It means you have to fight for everything you do. Opportunity was never given to me. I had to fight for it. Hard work is opportunity. At 23, I opened my own company, borrowed a few dollars. I paid it back early. And then 13 years later, I had amassed a company that had multiple offices, multiple employees, and we were doing very well. I'm a computer engineer. I guess most people say I'm a computer engineer because I'm a geek that can talk. A little different. Well, from that, I was working with a large company. They liked what they saw. They recruited me. I went to work for them. They're a Fortune 500. That was 14 years ago. 14 years later today, I'm an executive with that company. I'm a senior director. These are all IT contracts. These are engineering contracts. So just knowing that I'm an engineer, you already know that I have a process. There's a solution solved. There's a methodology to do everything I do. Nothing's random. And so in managing that portfolio of business of contracts, they're valued at $1.25 billion. That's really hard. It's a lot of work. It's 1/6 of the state of Mississippi's budget. That's a $6 billion budget. So when it comes to understanding how to create a budget, I know how to do it. When it comes to know how to cut a budget, I know how to that. When it comes to understanding how to enrich people's lives or create an opportunity to foster new business in an environment where everybody's afraid to spend their money, I know how to do that. I'm very qualified for this job, as I'm sure the other gentlemen sitting at this table believe they're also very qualified. I appreciate your consideration and your vote for Tom Carter for Congress. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you very much. I want to begin by thanking the Coast Young Professionals, Dr. Lucas, and all of you for being here. I particularly want to thank my wife, Margaret, for being here, and a lot of friends and neighbors, and a lot of you that I haven't seen for a while. I want to work with you for a nation that lives within its means, a nation that respects all human life, including the unborn, a nation that respects its veterans and senior citizens, the very people that made this nation great, a nation that protects your right to bear arms, above all, a nation that is not afraid to say, "In God we trust." For 21 years, I had the great privilege of representing South Mississippi in the halls of Congress. I saw some of the best of times and some of the worst of times. I'm very proud to have worked with Senator Lott and Senator Cochran to have provided about $21.5 billion worth of funds to help rebuild South Mississippi. Things you see like the Bay St. Louis Bridge and the Biloxi Bridge. Things you don't see like the water lines and sewer lines. In my hometown of Bay St. Louis, $60 billion worth of water and sewer alone. In Biloxi, $300 million. Those are communities that would have gone bankrupt, where no one could afford to live, had our nation not ridden to the rescue. That's why, as someone who, like so many of you, lost his own home, I'm particularly irked at the gentleman who isn't here tonight, who, when he was just asked to pay the flood claims of the victims of Hurricane Sandy, voted no against Sandy relief. That's all it did, was pay the flood claims. In a district where people are patriotic and know how important national defense is, but also in a district where it's the biggest employer in South Mississippi's national defense, Stephen Palazzo voted with Nancy Pelosi to cut the defense budget by $490 billion. You want to know why the planes are leaving Keesler? It's because of that vote. And then lastly, and again, something that's very personal, as we try to get our friends and neighbors to move back. I worked hard to make wind insurance more affordable. We had a forum right here in this building. Stephen Palazzo voted for the Big Waters Act that called for unlimited increases to your federal flood insurance. That's not representation. I want to go back and fight for the people of South Mississippi. Make it easier for you to come back. Stephen Palazzo has made it harder for you to live here. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you. Let's start with the first question. Should the voters of South Mississippi support you in June and then again in November, I would like to ask you to tell us 3 people that you could support in January as Speaker of the House and give us a little insight into why you could support those 3 people. And we'll start with Mr. Kelly.
Well, the one person who I wouldn't support right off the bat is John Boehner. John Boehner has not done a good job of leading the Republicans in Congress over the past 2 terms. He has constantly compromised with the big government liberals in the Democratic Party to raise taxes, to raise spending, to cut veterans' benefits, to raise the national debt. That's not conservatism. Some people who I would support are Justin Amash, a very conservative representative from the, I forget which district, Michigan. He's shown great fortitude and actually put together a coalition last term to try and block John Boehner's appointment as Speaker. I could stand behind him easily. A few others, Mark Sanford, former governor of South Carolina, has shown great fortitude in voting along constitutional and conservative lines, as well as Dana Rohrabacher, representative from California. I feel any of those men would be fantastic speakers. They could put us back on the path to fiscal responsibility and constitutionally limited government.
Thank you. Mr. Vincent?
Same question?
Same question.
Well, I would have to agree with Tavish. I certainly wouldn't vote for John Boehner. I'm very disappointed in him. We hear the established Republicans telling us quite often that they can do nothing because they only have control of 1/2 of 1/3 of the government. That's hockey puck. We, the Republicans, control the most important body in all of Washington, D.C., and that's the U.S. House of Representatives. Why? Because the U.S. House is in control of the money. And then when I hear John Boehner saying he can't negotiate with Washington, with Obama, I'm stunned. You're in control of all of the money. What do you mean you can't negotiate with Obama? Turn me loose on Obama and let me control the money, and I'll show you the difference. And had I been the Speaker of the House last year, Obamacare would have been defunded. It would have been gone. The stick-out, stand-out person I would vote for, and there's only one on my list to be Speaker of the House to replace John Boehner, is Trey Gowdy from South Carolina. There's a man with the courage and initiative to stand up to the Democrats and stand up to Obama. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
This is the actual first vote that any congressman would make in office. It will set the tone for the rest of the Congress. So it's not a vote that should ever be taken lightly. We've had 2 past congressmen, one incumbent and one past, that apparently have taken it lightly. I would not. I have already looked at the field of who's sitting there. Trey Gowdy is my first choice. Now, I am not solidified on Trey Gowdy because there's some more work that would have to be done. And at the moment, I'm in the middle of a campaign. So upon being elected, I would be looking towards Trey Gowdy to receive my vote. The second person is Governor Sanford. I actually agree he is a very strong conservative as well. However, there's a lot of work that's got to be left undone. So at the moment, I don't know that I have a third candidate that's on my list, but Trey Gowdy would be my first.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
As you know, the real vote will take place in the Republican caucus, not on the House floor. Once they decide on a candidate, that candidate will be nominated on the House floor. I'm going to support the Republican candidate that is chosen by the caucus. But if you're asking for a good man who could be Speaker, I think I could be Speaker. I think I'd be a heck of a Speaker. I doubt I'd ever be nominated because what happens, what the American public misses out on, is most of these people ride to leadership not because they're leaders, but because they're good fundraisers. They spend entirely too much time raising funds for themselves and other candidates. They don't spend anywhere near enough time. That's the fundamental change that needs to occur in Washington. If you're looking for the name of a really good man, that would be Walter Jones from the Coastal District of North Carolina. Very district, very similar to this, and that is coastal. A lot of military retirees, someone who is very supportive of the All Perils Bill, someone who understands how awful the Bigot Waters Bill was. And quite frankly, someone who took the time to write every single family that lost a loved one in the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. And I just think that we need more people like Walter Jones. He'll never be nominated for leadership. But if you're looking for a true leader, it's a guy like Walter Jones.
Thank you.
Mr. Vincent, we'll start with you. Share your thoughts on financial foreign aid. When and where is it acceptable or unacceptable?
I'm not a fan of foreign aid at all. We have squandered a lot of treasure, and especially in the Middle East and in other places. We're giving money to people who hate us, and I think that is a very bad idea. So I'm never going to be in favor of foreign aid. Now I realize, I know what the arguments are, that we need to maybe bribe people to like us, but I just, when it comes to spending our hard-earned tax dollars, I just think we've got better places to spend it here than overseas. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Ms. Carter?
Well, we're talking about 1% of GDP, 1%. And that's still a lot of money, but it's 1%. At the end of the day, before we can really go wholeheartedly at spending 1% of GDP on anything, we need to understand that we're $17 trillion in debt that has been run up by career politicians. We got to stop it. We got to find a way to balance our budget and eliminate $1.4 trillion every year in a deficit. Now, you're talking about spending money on foreign aid that's going to contribute to that debt. I could not run the businesses I run doing that. I would have been fired. So I can't do it, I won't vote for it, right off the bat. And once we either get a budget amendment, which I'm for, and we begin balancing our budget and bringing our fiscal house into order, then I would consider our 1% of GDP being redistributed back out. But that would be a little far off before I think we would ever get there.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
I have voted against foreign aid every time it came up. Not that we should be trying to help people down on their luck, but quite simply, as the other gentleman had pointed out, it's all borrowed money. And I just can't see borrowing money from the communist Chinese to give away. The other thing that's wrong with foreign aid is approximately half of that money goes to two relatively wealthy countries, Israel and Egypt. They can pay their own bills. They don't need to be paid not to shoot at each other. What I do support, now that peace is starting to, we're having a greater opportunity for peace, is traditionally units from the National Guard, from the reserves, from the CBs, would deploy to third world countries to do things like build a single room schoolhouse, dig a water well so that kids don't die of the diseases in their water. That builds great respect for the United States of America, builds great relationships with people from other countries. If we're going to do anything, we ought to be doing things like that rather than squandering money as we have been on the present foreign aid policy.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
The first thing I consider before any vote is whether or not it's constitutional. The Congress can only perform the duties laid out in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, right here. If it's not in here, you can't do it. And guess what's not in here? Foreign aid. So whether or not we can afford it, it can't be done. If we want to help other countries, the best way we can do it is by making it as easy as possible for Americans to go over there with their nonprofits and do it, by freeing up the economy here. So we have excess wealth that we can then give to our nonprofits and donate and spend charitably in other countries. Just generally to promote a sort of peaceful atmosphere throughout the world so that we have more intertrade between countries, which, as we know, increases wealth internationally. That's the real solution. Prosperity also always follows from smaller government, from free trade, and from entrepreneurship. That's what we need more of. That'll fix the world, not us borrowing money from someone and giving it to somebody else. It's not constitutional, it's not good fiscal sense, and I'm not for it.
Thank you.
Mr. Carter, we'll start with you. Fast and Furious, NSA spy, IRS targeting, Benghazi. Are these trumped-up phony scandals legitimate concerns for Congress? And if so, how should Congress handle these issues differently?
Well, I don't know if they're trumped up or not, because I think we're still investigating. I think there's a process to our federal government that they want to be transparent, but it's not. I believe these items are things that the people should know about. I think they should be out in front. I believe we should constantly be questioning them time after time after time. Benghazi is one that sticks out in my mind, one of the ones you said, because of the 4 dead Americans. And nobody's been brought to justice. And they have been fighting the fact that they don't want to have hearings. That angers me. The other thing is the NSA. The NSA, that is a 4th and 5th Amendment issue. And everybody constantly talks to me on the stump about the 2nd Amendment, which I am definitely pro-gun. I'm not worried about the 2nd Amendment. I am worried about the 4th and 5th because of what you just said, NSA. If they can come in and do an illegal search and seizure, get my data, my privacy, and use it as they want to, what's to stop them from coming in my house and taking my gun? I think we have a long way to go. I do not think they're trumped up because we don't have answers. We don't have answers because we don't have leadership that displays courage. It is hard work asking the right questions. It's hard work when you get the right answers. It's hard work passing out the issues that are of the day and the way they are to be answered.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Let's start with Fast and Furious. Obviously, any time our nation is putting guns in the hands of criminals, something is desperately wrong. That was a screw up from start to finish. In the case of the NSA spying, again, I believe in the Constitution. I understand that having served when 9/11 occurred, that we never want something like that to happen again, and we need to take every step possible to keep that from happening. But at the same time, we have to protect the rights of the American citizen. And that's going to be a tough balancing act. It is a balancing act that, for the sake of our nation, we have to find. On Benghazi, The truth is that every embassy around the world has a bullseye on it. We just have to admit that. No matter where someone is stationed, a terrorist organization is probably trying to, at this very moment, trying to find a way to hurt Americans. So we have to be ever cognizant of the security of our embassies. And when a screw-up like this occurs, then the leadership people who did not respond properly need to be held accountable, need to accept their mistakes, admit their mistakes, and then see to it that it doesn't happen again.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
To start with Fast and Furious, I completely agree. American deaths have been traced to the weapons that the Justice Department allowed criminals in Mexico to obtain, and that's completely inexcusable. Even more Americans have died because of that than Benghazi, and we don't hear enough about it. We don't see an impeachment for Eric Holder, which, by the way, I have supported and I will support. The House has the exclusive power to impeach, and I intend on supporting articles of impeachment for both President Obama and Attorney General Eric Holder, who have committed impeachable offenses against the Constitution and the American people. The NSA spying I would consider the greatest ongoing scandal because it hasn't stopped. That's the issue. It's still happening and we're not doing anything about it. Last year, Justin Amash, the representative I mentioned, brought an amendment to the floor that would have stopped the NSA dead in its tracks, doing unconstitutional spying on Americans. The Republican House voted it down, and Congressman Plaza was with that vote against that amendment. I find that inexcusable. The NSA has no legal right to infringe upon the privacy of my communications. I don't agree that it's a balancing act. Ben Franklin said, "Those who would give up essential liberty for a little temporary safety deserve neither." And I believe that. And I believe that the privacy of our communications is an essential liberty that has every place in a free country. And so I would oppose all NSA spying without warrants.
Thank you. Mr. Vincent?
Wow, you brought up quite a list, and Fast and Furious is infuriating. But it points up to me that the Justice Department is being run by a criminal, and what's wrong with this picture? And I have to agree with everybody else up here on the stage, especially Tavish. He's nailed it pretty good. NSA spying is unconstitutional and ought to be illegal. One of the things that's really, really frustrating and infuriating too is this business of the IRS investigating and targeting conservative groups. Do you remember what actually ended up taking Richard Nixon down? We all remember Watergate, but that was not what took him down. That was not what forced him to resign in the face of impeachment. Richard Nixon had an enemies list, like Obama does, and Richard Nixon got caught using the IRS against the enemies on his enemies list. That was what forced his impeachment. And look at what we have with Obama. That is many, 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 many times worse than that. How is it that he is able to survive and get away with that? I think the only answer is that the Republican leadership in the House is just not doing their job. They should be forcing these people to do something else. They should be forcing them to come into line, and they have the tools to do it. They could tell the IRS when they subpoena documents, you've got such and such a time to get them in here. If you don't, we're going to cut your funding. They have the power to do it. They're just not doing it.
Thank you, gentlemen. Brad?
Do you believe in American exceptionalism? And if so, can you explain what that means to you? We'll start this with Mr. Taylor.
Obviously, the founding fathers of this nation were exceptional in their vision for a new nation based on principles where all men were created equal, on the right of representative government, on the rule of law rather than the rule of man, and quite frankly, that was exceptional at that time. It has become more of the norm around the world, but it is still exceptional. I think that we as Americans have gotten where we are because people worked exceptionally hard. We didn't get it easy. It was the struggles of the United States, the building of the Panama Canal, the Transcontinental Railroad, the struggles of this nation in World War II, World War I, Korea, Vietnam, the struggles of the troops as we speak in Afghanistan are exceptional. But if we are to remain the world's greatest nation, we have to work at it every day. We have to work every day for a balanced budget. We have to work every day for an American's economy where the young people in the South Mississippi can live and work here in South Mississippi. We have to work every day to protect our nation because there are a heck of a lot of threats out there. Threats that you see like Al-Qaeda, threats that we aren't paying enough attention to like the Communist Chinese. So yes, this is an exceptional country, but it is an exceptional country because of the vision of our founding fathers, because of great leaders that have come after them, but mostly it's because of exceptionally hard work on the part of the American people to take those gifts that our Creator gave us and turn this into the world's greatest nation.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly.
I agree with Gene for the most part. Our exceptionalism certainly comes from the vision of our founders, that vision of self-government that was unprecedented within not just the Western world, but the entire world, really. I disagree, however, with the notion that exceptionalism remains. We've largely cast aside what made us great. You know, in the 19th century, from around 1800 to 1900, this country transformed from a backwater collection of territories owned by an empire into an empire unto itself, powerful enough to stand against any nation on earth. How far have we come since then? Not very far. We've got cell phones, we've got computers, but we haven't gotten any more free. We've gotten less free. We have burdens on us now that would have never been imagined by the Founding Fathers. You know, the Founding Fathers never imagined that every year 30% of your income would be taken away from you by a government for your own good. You don't start making money until May. You're finally making money, by the way, so congratulations. But the first 4 months go straight to DC. That's an insult to human freedom. Every other thing we've talked about so far, the NSA, Fast and Furious, Benghazi, these are embarrassments to anybody who considers themselves civilized. You know, we're in 2014. For the past 240 years, we've called ourselves a free country, self-governing people. I think that if we can get back to that principle in reality, not just in rhetoric, that we will be exceptional again.
Thank you. Mr. Vincent.
Well, thank you very much. That's a very interesting question about American exceptionalism. You know, it was in the news here a little bit recently. And John Kerry, I remember, was one, and Hillary Clinton was another. They came out and said American exceptionalism doesn't exist. And Vladimir Putin weighed in. He said American exceptionalism doesn't exist. You know, you can forgive Putin because he didn't understand it, but Hillary Clinton and John Kerry should have known better. But American exceptionalism is misunderstood. It's not the fact that Americans are better at anything than any other group of people, either racially or any other way. American exceptionalism is the fact that Americans are free to do and follow their own dreams. They are in charge of their own destinies. That's what makes America great, is the freedom for us to follow our own dream. We can go to the school of our choice. We can take up the job that we want, the education that we want. It's all up to us what we do. Whether we work or not, it's up to us. Do you know that that is exceptional? Very few, I don't think there's any other country that has that type of freedom. When I was in communist Czechoslovakia, everybody worked, everybody made the same amount of money, but you didn't have the freedom to choose what you did. And that's what makes America great, is the fact that the individuals can pursue their own goals and their own dreams. That's what American exceptionalism is.
Thank you. Mr. Carter.
We have a constitution that was developed off of 5 separate documents starting back in 1100 AD. They came forward on Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights. And those gentlemen that created that Bill of Rights for us, our Constitution, they developed something that was better than them. That's exceptional. It's creating something that you want to be a part of, but it's better than you. That's exceptionalism. They created a pearl that we have today called the United States of America. It's the greatest country in all the world. It's the freest country. Our freedom does set us apart. The freedom to go out and start your own business. The freedom to go out and go to work for somebody. The freedom to sit at home and do nothing. At your choice. That gives you freedom. Exceptionalism is what they created. Our founding fathers penned a belief in the 1700s. They said it was every man's civic duty to serve his fellow man, even in elected office, at the peril of his business, then come home. There's a reason why they wrote that. It's because they expected men and women to go to Congress. They expected people to give of their time and their service and for their crops to suffer. And when they came back home, their neighbor had tried to keep up their crops, but then their neighbor would go. That's what makes us exceptional. That's what makes us different. Is we look out for our neighbor. Whenever there's a problem, whenever there's a hurricane, whenever there's a tornado, just like was happened in Tupelo, we go, we give. That makes us exceptional, call it our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.
Mr. Kelly, we'll start with you. In your opinion, what is the single greatest threat, domestic or foreign, facing the United States, and how do we, as a nation, prepare for and conquer it?
I think by far we are more threatened domestically than foreignly. We have thousands of nuclear warheads all around the world. Nobody's going to attack the United States, not a country. Terrorists, sure, they'll attack us. They'll scratch us, they'll kill Americans, but in the end, we can beat any battle. A recent study showed that we could take on every country on Earth at the same time and win. So I don't think external threats are really a bother. Domestically, we are incredibly threatened. The attitude that government is a solution to problems, that ceding your freedoms to somebody 1,000 miles away will make your life happier and better, that's the threat, that attitude. Giving up your right as a human being to live freely to somebody else who will then point a gun at your head and make you do things that you don't necessarily want to do, buy things you don't necessarily want to buy, throw you in jail if you don't do it. That's the greatest threat to America right now, and that's why I'm running. I can't stand seeing that attitude become pervasive among the mainstream of Washington, D.C. At one point, we thought government was the greatest threat to liberty, and I still think it is. And I'm still fighting that revolution that we started 240 years ago.
Thank you. Mr. Vincent?
Wow, now that's a really good question. I get a little bit frustrated from time to time when I see our men and women serving over in Afghanistan, risking their lives, their bodies for our freedom. They're protecting our freedom. Our freedoms are not at risk on the battlefield of Afghanistan. We're losing our freedoms in Washington, D.C. That's where the problem is. Let's bring our boys home and let's fix Washington, D.C. There's the problem. We're talking about the Fourth and Fifth Amendment. That's really, really good, the right to feel secure in your possessions. The federal government is so out of control now, they're running in with SWAT teams just about everywhere. It's really difficult to feel secure when you're looking down the barrel of a gun held by a federal agent. You know, did you know that the Small Business Administration has a SWAT team? The SBA? The SBA went into Mountain Pure Water, just outside of Little Rock, went in with guns drawn, and took all of the computers and files and ad nauseum. They wouldn't let anybody in or out of the building after the federal agents moved in there. The owner finally came up later. They wouldn't let him in, and he called his lawyer, and his lawyer came, and they wouldn't let him in. And his lawyer asked to see the paperwork, and they showed him the paperwork, and the lawyer said, "This is not a valid search warrant. This is not valid what you have." You know what he was told? "We'll do anything we want because we're from the government." That's where your freedom is gone right there.
Thank you. Mr. Carter?
Could you repeat the question, please?
In your opinion, what is the single greatest threat, domestic or foreign, facing the United States, and how do we, as a nation, prepare for and conquer it?
I believe our biggest problems are, domestically, are balanced budget. $17 trillion in debt, $220 trillion in unfunded mandates. We're broke. We're broke. Your accountant has told you your checkbook is over. How do you pay your bill tomorrow? We're broke. We had a growth of 0.1%. There was somebody actually happy about it. That should be shocking. We've got to find a way to change our tax problem. That's where it all starts. We have a tax code of 60,000 pages. 60,000 pages. How many of you read it? How many of you actually used it? How many of you didn't have somebody to tell you how much you owed? We got to fix it. We got to get to a flatter, fairer tax plan. We got to find a way to get our budget back under control. We got to foster an opportunity for business growth. Because what we have is we have people scared to death to spend their dollars, and we're going down fast. It's scary stuff. It's real stuff. It's true stuff. And on top of that, we have domestic issues that are for our life and liberty and our privacy. I'm very concerned about our privacy. The fact that somebody can take your data, can take your information, and create something out of it that you can't control, and the government says, trust me, I've got that. Well, the government has proven that they can't control the data from hackers. The government's proven they can't, large business has proven the same. At the end of the day, your privacies are at risk. So our biggest problems are domestic. Foreign problems begin at our borders, and we've got to secure them. If we don't secure them, then we're going to increase our 20 million already unauthorized illegal aliens in this environment.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor?
Not that long ago, in an appearance before the House Armed Services Committee, Admiral Mike Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was asked that same question: what is the biggest threat to America? Now, this is a man who spent his life in uniform, who had 2 sons deployed to Iraq in life-threatening situations. And Admiral Mullen's answer was the debt. I'm in total agreement with Admiral Mullen. This nation is going broke. And a nation that is going broke cannot defend itself. A nation that's going broke cannot repair its infrastructure. A nation that's going broke cannot fulfill its commitments to its seniors and its veterans. A nation that's going broke can't perform. A nation that's going broke finds themselves in a situation where they could be borrowing money from the Chinese to buy weapons from the Chinese to defend ourselves from the Chinese. What's the solution? The solution is a balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. In 1995, I was part of the effort that passed the only balanced budget amendment to the United States Constitution. Passed overwhelming in the House and went to the Senate and lost by 1 vote. 1 stinking vote. At that point, our nation was about $4 trillion in debt. We're now $17 trillion in debt. Had that become the law of the land in 1995, we'd be less than $4 trillion in debt now. We'd be paying down debt. So if you want the problem, it's the debt. If you want the solution, it's a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, so that no matter who's in the White House, no matter who's running the House, no matter who's running the Senate, they cannot charge bills to our grandchildren that we ought to be paying today.
Thank you. Holly?
Mr. Vincent, we're going to start with you. Some suggest that numerous unelected federal agencies are drastically altering our regulatory and civil liberty landscape, seemingly unfettered. Do you believe this is a problem? And if so, how should we address it?
Well, that's a really good question. Have you got another one? Well, it really is a problem. We have a runaway administration. They're just totally out of control. Take the EPA, for example. Do you know that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has redrawn the borders of the state of Wyoming? And what right does the EPA have to do that? What right does the Small Business Administration have doing what they did with Mountain Pure Water? What right does the government have when they attack a Gibson guitar? That's, they're just totally out of control. And the EPA is my favorite. They keep talking about global warming and global climate change. That carbon is a problem. CO2 is a problem. You know, you never hear about the science behind such. They always talk about, well, so many scientists say this, So many scientists say that. They give you a pie chart, blah, blah, this and blah, blah, that. Well, I'm scientifically trained, and I've looked into the science behind global warming, global climate change, if you will, and I'm going to tell you what is not any science. It is global warming is the triumph of junk science over provable fact. They talk about how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. Do you know how much CO2 is in the atmosphere? We all know, everybody knows, it's been measured, nobody disagrees. It's about 400 parts per million, but that's a number we can't get our head around. Let me tell you, out of the next 10,000 molecules of air you breathe in, out of the next 10,000, you know how much of that will be CO2? 4. 4 molecules in 10,000. That can't be causing such a big problem.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
I'm going to need you to repeat the question.
Some suggest that numerous unelected federal agencies are drastically altering our regulatory and civil liberties landscape, seemingly unfettered. Do you believe this is a problem, and if so, how should we address it?
I actually do think it's a problem. Our regulatory agencies have began to take regulatory policy as something they can implement as law. An example of that is there's a program called e-rulemaking. E-rulemaking is out on the web. You can go look at it. It's a program that all of the agencies put into their regulatory requirements. Now, who subscribes to e-rulemaking? Well, your lawyers do. Your accountants do. Because they're looking at what the new regulations are around product development, around environmental affairs, around tax laws, around loopholes, things of that nature. And what has happened is this is just one program in a host that is taking on law when they are not. It is not law. It is what they argue in court. It's what they argue against people. It's what they argue in the recent Bundy issues. The regulatory problems that we have, we've allowed our government to get out of hand. We've allowed unconstitutional agencies to be given the right to develop legislation. And that's where we're going wrong every day in that regard. Regulations are to be developed by our Congress. And they're to be approved by those Congress, committees and agencies in order for those to be handed out.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Ma'am, I'm going to ask you to repeat the question again. And if you would get a little closer to the microphone.
Absolutely. Is that better?
Thank you.
Some suggest that numerous unelected federal agencies are drastically altering our regulatory and civil liberties landscape, seemingly unfettered. Do you believe this is a problem, and if so, how should we address it?
It is absolutely a problem. There are a lot of well-intended people out there who have taken their administrative positions, their unelected appointed positions, and have stymied the American economy. I'm lucky enough to serve on the Hancock County Port and Harbor Commission. And one of the things we're trying to do is dredge them out of the Pearl River. So I volunteered to get the permits for our agency to dredge about a half a mile swath, about 6 feet deep, 200 feet wide. That's already on the books. Congress has already approved this channel. At best, that's going to take about a year and a half just to get the permits. Now, believe me, I am an environmentalist. Those of you who know me, you know I love the fish. You know that I want the water to be clean. But there's something seriously wrong when, first of all, Hancock County's got to spend $45,000 to have the bottom of that river tested for toxins, and no one expects them to be there. There has been absolutely no reason for anyone to expect that those toxins are there. Additionally, then, after one permit, it goes to another between the Corps of Engineers, EPA, Fish and Wildlife, United States Coast Guard. You're talking about a process for a public entity to dredge a channel that is already on the books and has been on the books since about 1910, a year and a half just to get the permits. So obviously, all agencies, Congress needs to take a look at every single one of the agencies, rein them in back to the intention of the original law, and see to it that a government works for our people rather than just to slow things down.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
Well,
The regulatory, and I remember the question, but the regulatory agencies are a problem for two reasons. The first one is one that I keep coming back to. It's this guy again. If you look over in Article 1, Section 8, it says the power to regulate interstate commerce is left up to who? Congress. What branch of government are these agencies in? The executive. How are they writing rules? Well, unconstitutionally. That was called non-delegation doctrine. Powers of Congress were not allowed to be delegated to the executive branch until a mid-1920s case in which the liberal Supreme Court, who, by the way, is one of our worst unelected bodies of officials, gave essentially bureaucrats the ability to write laws. And we kind of spiraled out of control from there. And so you have my stance there. The other problem is, like we've been talking about everybody here, the laws they write are just ridiculous. Obamacare is a great example. The bill, we all know, it's 2,000 pages long. Nobody's read the whole thing. No one knows what's in it. But what's worse is once it got to Health and Human Services, guess how many pages of regulations they wrote for the implementation of Obamacare? 20,000. 20,000 pages. How many people can say that they can sit down and read a 20,000-page document? Huh? I don't think I read 20,000 pages in my life. And I'm a law student. I read a lot. All right? That's ridiculous. And that's just one law. All right? One law being implemented by one agency. We have hundreds of thousands of laws on the books that these agencies are implementing, each one with its own 10,000-page implementation document. Nobody knows what these laws say. Nobody knows how they actually work. It's completely unconstitutional, and they all have to go.
Thank you, gentlemen. Brad?
Gentlemen, you've been very concise tonight. I appreciate that. That said, we're a little ahead of schedule, so if there are no objections, we'll add one additional question before we go to closing comments, if that's okay. So we'll start this question with Mr. Carter. Many of Congress's more disputed actions have been upheld by the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Commerce Clause. Do you see any cases in which the Court's interpretation has created a contradiction between that interpretation and the 10th Amendment?
Well, I do, but I apologize, I can't call the actual case at this moment. The Commerce Clause itself is a little bit ambiguous in the way that it's been construed by our court systems. They have taken a stance on the Commerce Clause that has gotten many different interpretations.
Mr. Taylor?
If you're looking for an example of a Supreme Court that's out of control, you don't have to look any further than Roe versus Wade. Any number of states, any number of communities have passed laws that ban abortions. There is no law that says you can have an abortion. That's a Supreme Court ruling. That is an example of a Supreme Court that is out of touch with the American people. They're certainly out of touch with the people of this state. They're certainly out of touch with me. So if you're looking for, there is no better example of a Supreme Court that's not listening to the American people than their decision on Roe versus Wade.
Thank you. Mr. Kelly?
Well, this is my area of expertise, so excuse me if I wax poetic a little bit. The beginning of the Supreme Court's misuse or abuse of the Commerce Clause began with the case Wickard v. Filburn, tried in the New Deal era under Roosevelt, which it allowed Congress to tell a farmer that he wasn't allowed to grow wheat on his own land to feed his family because of the wheat growing quotas. If that sounds ridiculous to you, well, it does to me too, and it did to every Supreme Court previously. But once they did that, the floodgates were open, and eventually we came to Obamacare. And the Sibelius case, as it's called, is probably the best modern example of the Commerce Clause gone awry. We have a law here that requires you to buy a product, whether you want to buy it or not. They literally can throw you in jail for not buying something, for not giving the money. I mean, it sounds like a tax, but it's not, because it's a transfer of your wealth to another private individual. That is completely unconstitutional. It was not the intention of the Commerce Clause. The intention of the Commerce Clause was to free trade between the states. Free it up. How many laws do you know that free trade up? 0. All of them block trade of some form. Every single law that Congress passes these days having to do with the Commerce Clause blocks trading some sort of item or service. Guns, another one of my specialty, great example. Every single gun law on the book is a Commerce Clause law. All of them completely unconstitutional. All of them interfere with the state's rights to regulate. Roe versus Wade is a great example of a Supreme Court run awry, but it actually has nothing to do with the Commerce Clause. They actually just created a new right out of thin air to have an abortion and added it onto the Bill of Rights as an invisible amendment. But Commerce Clause-wise, I'd say that the Sebelius case is probably the best example today.
Mr. Vincent.
Boy, I'm not going to try to top that one, I'll tell you that. But I'll have to agree with Mr. Taylor, Congressman Taylor. I think that the best example of the Supreme Court going awry is Roe. I have looked through there and I could not find the right to privacy anywhere in the Constitution, and it's a surprise to me. I think the federal government needs to get out of the abortion business. That's an issue that should be decided at the state level. So that's, I certainly can't match him.
Thank you. So with that, we'll move to closing statements, and we'll start with the next candidate, which would be Mr. Taylor.
Well, again, I want to thank the Coast Young Professionals, the University of Southern Mississippi. But most of all, thank all of you for taking the night when you could have been home with your families to be here with us, giving us an opportunity to make our case to serve as your next congressman. Again, the greatest privilege of my life was serving South Mississippi's congressman. And I felt like when given that opportunity, although I'm not a great person, with the help of others, I was able to do great things. With the help of Trent Lott, Senator Cochran, we were able to rebuild South Mississippi, $21 billion, unprecedented amount of help. I was able to lead an effort that fulfilled the promise of lifetime health care to our military retirees, to extend health care benefits to every drilling, bargeman, and reservist in honor of the commitment that they had made in Iraq and Afghanistan, where over half of the troops that were serving were bargeman reservists. I was honored to have led the effort to put mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles in the budget that saved thousands of lives in Afghanistan and Iraq, people that would have been maimed, people that would have died needlessly. I was honored to have hosted 2 town hall meetings a month, where anyone from South Mississippi could come say what was on their mind. And I'll contrast this with the present congressman who, for 3.5 years, has had 1 town hall meeting that was open to the public. Our present congressman who voted against helping the victims of Hurricane Sandy, just to pay their flood claims. A congressman who voted with Nancy Pelosi to cut national defense by $490 billion, which is leading to angst at Keesler Air Force Base, CV Base, Camp Shelby, and all the other military installations here in South Mississippi. And a congressman who voted to raise your flood insurance rates by unlimited amounts. I fought to make insurance more affordable. I had a forum right here in this very room to explain the need for all perils insurance here and throughout our country, and how important it was to have affordable insurance on the Mississippi coast can come back. Stephen Palazzo voted for unlimited increases to your flood insurance. Stephen Palazzo doesn't listen to you. Stephen Palazzo isn't here tonight. Stephen Palazzo doesn't come to fairs or festivals because he's afraid of the people of South Mississippi. He's afraid of his voting record. He doesn't want to face you for what he's done. I want to be your congressman again because I'll look out for you. It's the greatest privilege to serve you. I'm asking for that opportunity again.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
I want to thank you guys for hosting this. I want to thank all of you guys for coming here tonight. You're the ones who decide who goes to D.C. You're the ones who decide who's protecting you from what I said is the greatest threat, which is the government. We have, in this election, a plethora of candidates to choose from, but I think we've got 2 incumbents who, in my opinion, have flawed records, and well, I think both of them are good men. I don't think either of them could do as good of a job as I could defending your rights and your freedoms. If you elect me, I'll be here every month. I will do 1 town hall per county per year in this district. I will be extremely accessible. a lot of time you'll be able to find me in my gun store and pick you. And my goal is simply to go to DC and tell all the guys up there who want to tell you what to do to go shopping. That's basically it. And along the way, I want to balance the budget. I want to bring our troops home, have them defending the U.S. instead of defending other countries on your tax dollar. And I want to make you a freer people overall. Because I want to be free, and I think you want to be free, and you certainly deserve to be free. We all do. So what I want you guys to do when you go home is ask yourself, who here is going to make you freer? Who at the end of the day is going to leave you a person more in control of his or her own destiny, his or her own life? I want you to come to that conclusion, and I hope that you come to the conclusion that it's me, because I think it is. And then on June 3rd, I want you to go to the box, to the voting box, and I want you to check my name off on the ballot. And I'd be happy to talk to you guys after this for as long as you want.